Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar on leveraging open source technologies for better services in the European software ecosystem. We have a very rich program for you today, so we would like to keep the introductions as short as possible. My name is John Favreau. I am the lead dissemination and communications specialist at SWForum.eu, the sponsor of this webinar. We will be having two keynote speakers from SWForum.eu, Juncal Alonso, who is the coordinator of the project, and from the Commission, Luis Busquets, who is the project officer. We will also be hearing from two of our R&I projects that are dealing especially with open source software. And we would also like to introduce you to two other very important projects within the software technologies ecosystem of the EU, which are focusing on policy and standardization, something also very relevant to open source software from a different kind of perspective. So a few words about logistics. We're going to have an interactive poll. We will be using Slido for this. And so connect to Slido and put in the keyword, the hashtag SWForum.webinar, which please put in the chat, Julie, so that people can also connect for that for when the time comes for the interactive polling session. Just a few simple housekeeping rules. We are recording this session, so that a link will be shared shortly afterwards. As will also all of the presentations be shared with you. Please don't activate your microphone or videos unless the time has come and you're given permission. However, we do welcome questions, which you can put into the Q&A section of the Zoom session here. You can see the button down below, and please try to indicate who you're asking the question to, so that we can answer them. If we don't have time during the session, we could also answer them afterwards. And that's about it for now. So without further ado, I would like now for you to be introduced to the SWForum project by the coordinator of SWForum.eu, who is Juncal Alonso. So Juncal, the floor is now yours.
So thank you very much, John, for your introduction. I will now share my screen.
Let me stop sharing. So, okay.
Okay. So thank you again, John, for this introduction to our webinar on leveraging open source technologies for better services in the European software ecosystem. So today, as John introduced, I am Juncal Alonso from TECNALIA, and I am the project coordinator of this CSA, which is SWForum. And I would like to very briefly introduce you to the project and to the context of this CSA, which is in charge of organizing this webinar. So just some figures about our project. We started in October 2020, so and we will last until March next year. So we are just in the final phase of the project. We are the software technology CSA, and we are our consortium is composed of 5 partners. 2 of us, we are already here today presenting, me and my colleagues from Trust IT, who are leading the communication and dissemination part, but we also have in our consortium 3 more partners, which are Consortium, University of Oxford, and Politecnico di Milano. So very briefly, I would like to explain you which is our main objective as a CSA. So our main objective is to raise awareness and strengthen the competitiveness of the European software industry. And we want to do this through this forum. Indeed, it is part of our name, SWForum. So we are building this sustainable forum for the different stakeholders, for researchers, software providers, software developers, the policymakers, to have a place for our space for engagement. But it's not only about building this platform where the different stakeholders can share assets or discussions or share experiences, but we also want to create this community that will also last once the project is over. So we are also deciding the governance rules, the business models that kind of forum or sustainable community will have. We are also, apart from creating this forum, this space for engagement, we are also building a set of outcomes in support to the research and innovation projects we are supporting, and also to the policymakers, to the European Commission, in form of different services like the project radar or the MTRL methodology that you will learn a little bit more for the projects afterwards, and also the research and innovation roadmaps and the landscape reports that we are creating, developing for the European Commission in order to derive in a set of policy-related recommendations. So, of course, this very big objective can be broken down into more specific objectives. So let's go a little bit over them, starting from the first objective, which is to promote the cross-fertilization between the different stakeholders in the different areas of relevance to software forum, which is software technologies, digital infrastructure, and cybersecurity. These are our mainframe areas. And we are doing this through a set of cross-fertilization workshops. Well, this has been a difficult, let's say, endeavor because of the timing of the situation with the pandemic. But we managed to organize at the very beginning of the project some of this in a virtual way. And we are now, let's say, moving to the physical workshops. And we already did one last month about green engineering and green software, and we are going also to organize some more in the next weeks and months that hopefully will be physical. As a second objective, we want to create this self-sustainable forum of researchers and practitioners. And for that, we need to define the governance rules, the business models of this sustainable forum, as well as a fellowship program which have been already launched with some experts and researchers that are participating as fellows with us. We also have created the online platform, which is, let's say, I would say the starting point where everything can be shared, every asset and all the outcomes of software forum can be accessed, can be accessible through it. Apart from this, we also, as I already anticipated, we are also building the research and innovation roadmaps on software technologies. We already created a first version, which is available in our webpage, and we will release a new version this month, where, of course, open source software it's one of the main topics to be addressed. Also, with respect to the landscape reports, which is a desktop research on the initiatives, different communities that are out there, and that could be part of this community. For the first version, we did this analysis on a more generic way, but again, for this second version that is going to be released in the next weeks, the main topic is the analysis of open source projects and open source communities and the success stories there, and also the lessons learned. So I think this could be also of relevance to this community. So don't miss the opportunity to check this also in our website. Continue with the third objectives, which of course as a CSA we need to support the research and innovation projects funded under different calls, and for this we are providing this tool that we call the project radar, where we can position the different funded projects, and we provide means to classify them and to quickly and easily get knowledge on which are the main topics they are working on. So this is also accessible through our webpage, and apart from that, and linked to this project radar, we have also the tool for the projects, which is called the Hub of Project Mini-sites, which provides a kind of windows to the different projects with relevant info that the projects want to share with the community, their next event, and this kind of things. So we are supporting, our aim is also to support the visibility of the research and innovation projects in the area of software technologies. And last but not least, and as part part of these services to the projects, we have also created this MTRL methodology, which combine the traditional TRL assessment with an assessment with respect to the market readiness level, and the different projects can assess their status, the situation of the outcomes with respect to these two axes. So the technical readiness level of their outcomes, as well as the market readiness level of these outcomes. So that's in a nutshell our project, and we stand for over these three pillars. So mapping, cross-fertilization, and standardization, road mapping and governance with the different roadmaps that we are creating, and of course engaging the community, creating these webinars for the projects in order to enhance the visibility and, let's say, expand the impact of the projects towards, let's say, a bigger community through our CSA. I'm doing a little bit of a spoiler here to Luis probably, but I also want to use this opportunity also in this webinar today and for this community to make an announcement about the next workshop that we are organizing in collaboration with the European Commission, which would be indeed focused again in open source software, open source hardware for computing and sustainability. So don't miss the opportunity to join this event that will take place in Brussels in the 2nd of December. Probably Luis will give a little bit more information about this afterwards. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much to all the presenters that have that are with us today, and of course all the attendees. I hope we have a very interesting webinar today and also very interesting discussions. So thank you very much, John.
And thank you very much for this introduction, Juncal. And now I would like to take the opportunity to, in fact, hear from the Commission and to welcome Luis Busquets, who is the Program Officer in DG Connect E2, which is the Cloud and Software Unit. And perhaps even more important for today, he is the Project Officer of SWForum.eu. So Luis, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, John, and for giving me the floor and this opportunity to speak to all present about our interest in software technologies. And also, thank you very much to everybody who is attending this and who is participating and collaborating with the SW Forum. I'll try to be very brief because it is more important what you discuss than actually what I have to say. For the sake that it's actually you, the ones who are driving the software industry and who are actually helping us to get a more competitive economy. Anyway, as John has said, I'm working for the Cloud and Software Unit. The Cloud and Software Unit is the one who is actually responsible for the coordination and support action, which is SWForum. And it is not by chance that cloud and software are joined in the same unit. Actually, and if we look at history, the software, this is the actual software unit that has been around in the European institutions for the, I would say, more than 20 years, because my memory does not go beyond that, but probably even more. What is true is that it is not by chance that software has been so long there. And of course, nowadays, cloud computing is actually changing many paradigms in the ICT industry. And that's the reason why cloud and software are joined together under the same unit. Actually, software is everywhere. Everywhere, when we say everywhere, every intelligent device, it needs some software by definition. But also it's everywhere in the Commission services. We have units dealing with many different policies in the ICT sector, and they all actually need to produce, develop, or use, or even see what is happening in software in the respective area. And my unit actually is developing the policy concerning software engineering. Software engineering relates to actually a transversal activity which is present in everybody who is actually using software. And when we say software engineering, we mean new methods, new languages, but also what is happening in the sector, what is happening in software in general in IT. And of course, nowadays, if we have to say how is the software landscape, we cannot escape but to speak about open source. And it's not only today, actually, for the last 20 years, we have been seeing how open source has been embracing more and more the IT landscape. If 20 years ago there were big ideological fights on what open source was, today we're more pragmatic. And when I say we, I'm not speaking as the European Commission, but I'm speaking about the whole humankind and the whole ICT sector, actually, which sees how open source can actually be an asset on which to build upon new innovations. The IT industry basically is now using somewhere and somehow everyone some sort of open source. And why the Commission is interested in open source? Well, remember that we are a public administration. And as public administration, our shareholders are the EU citizens. And it's the EU citizens that make us to work for. And why are we interested in open source? Because open source has possibilities in order to give more opportunities to EU citizens, more jobs, better economy, and more possibilities. And that's basically the reason why. Of course, from 2000 to 2019, lots of things changed in open source. And that was the reason why in 2019, we organized a workshop on what was going to happen and what was happening in open source. And at that time, we realized that many things had changed in open source. First, of course, it had a tremendous economic impact. And because of that, we launched a study to measure that economic impact. The study on the economic impact of open source software and hardware in the European economy not only confirmed that open source has a huge impact in our economy, but also that it has a positive impact. And what's more, with the adequate policies, this impact could be even enhanced, maximized, and the return to the European Union would be even more. The study also demonstrated several key things, I would say, that should be seen to a certain extent obvious, but of course you need to have some evidence to see that is something to be done. Of course, if we speak about open source as something that you can embrace or not, that you can use or not, that actually it's free, well, free software to a certain extent. You can say, well, I don't want the evangelist that starts fighting if free software and open source is the same or not the same. No, I'm not entering into this discussion. But what is true is it does not seem very, very logical to try to mandate something that is actually open and that everybody is contributing to a certain extent for free. Excuse me. But actually, the study demonstrated that there were better ways to get the most maximum economic impact, and it was by illuminating actually the European Union, by seeing how open source could be a factor for success, a factor in companies for raising their competitiveness and being able to compete with other companies in a better position because of the use of assets that are already there and that can be used inside the company for the sake of producing the innovation that their customers want. And certainly the idea of illuminating is demonstrated also by policies in member states. While we have a member state that decided to mandate open source, and it was a complete fiasco, basically, because if you mandate something, but then you don't put the adequate interest in doing so, well, maybe it's not going to happen. While other member states, well, simply said, no, we're not mandating anything, but we're creating a culture of reuse, a culture of knowing that open source is there and can be used. And actually, these ones had got a better return in the economy than those that tried to do it by the force. In fact, when we invest in open source, we actually push up the whole innovation landscape in a particular domain. Now let's speak about particular IT domain. If it's in databases or if it is in the kernel, of course, well, you then have a kernel that can be used in many places. And of course, then when you develop a solution that requires a kernel, you don't need to redevelop it, but actually to just get the things that you've got already done and integrate them into your product. But also the European Commission is using and applying this philosophy internally. We have an open source strategy, and internally our IT is actually pushing for open source and using of course, when it makes sense. And not only internally, but through the Digital Europe program, we are also pushing for new software developments which are developed in open source. If the public administration develops some software, why to keep it internally? Once it is paid by us, well, everybody, every stakeholder, everyone in the EU should be able to use it. After all, that has been funded by public money. But anyway, we're speaking a lot about software, and of course, SWForum is the coordination and support action to push for software activities. Note that now we're speaking about open source hardware also. So we can see that open source hardware is in a similar level of maturity as open source software was 15 years ago. However, if it is to happen the same that has happened with open source software, it could be a competitive factor also for the industry in the next 10 years. And when we speak about open source hardware, well, we speak about many different open source things, from open source electronics to 3D printing, that would be open source 3D pieces, you would say, but also open source processors. And when we speak about open source processors, we also see how the open source communities have been able to develop a complete stack from the kernel up to the application. However, below the kernel, it's still closed. And the Laboratory for Open Computing Architecture already defined that, well, to a certain extent, that could be open if the adequate tools are put. Probably we will need some standards at the level of the processor. Maybe, well, there are already open source architectures at the level of the instruction set. but probably at the level of the electronics, there is some need on this. And that is work to be done. And because that is work to be done, we have decided to continue launching open source workshops in order to develop open source in different sectors. And as Juncal has announced, on the 2nd of December, the Commission, in collaboration with SWForum, is organizing a set of workshops in different domains that can be used, that range from open source processors, but also open source standardization, also open source in the cloud. And of course, you are all invited to attend this workshop, and to register. Registrations are not yet open, but will be during the course of this week. And having said this, John, I think that I have taken too much of the time, so I will have to give you back the floor. And thanks again to all for attending this webinar.
And thanks to you, Luis, for this very informative and exciting talk, actually. It was full of food for thought for us. And we're really grateful to hear from the Commission about their point of view. And now what we'd like to do before we hear the other talks is to hear from the participants in this webinar. We're already starting to get comments. Thank you, Guy, for your comment. Very well taken. So now we would like to go to the Slido polls, where we will ask you a couple of questions, and we would like to hear what your responses are. So, Julie, would you now turn on the first poll? So we would like to just to get your intuitive reaction when you hear open source. Can you give your reaction? Can you write one word or a phrase, of course, that for you characterizes open source and your reaction to it? Excellent. Good to see that the participants are starting to type now. Keep those answers coming. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Here they are coming out now. Great, thanks very much. I think that says a lot. That the one we see the most is community, and absolutely, I personally am totally in agreement with that, and I believe that most are too. So let's go to the next question now, Julie. There we go. And this has to do with what Luis was talking about, of course. What are the challenges? Now, we heard a lot from him about how the Commission is seeing the various types, the various dimensions of challenge in open source. What do you see as being the challenges? We already heard from one of you in the comments in the Q&A chat. What do the others think are the problems of open source? We're seeing a few come out now, a couple of things that are beginning to be seen as the bigger challenges. Excellent. I believe that we're beginning to see a pattern here. One of the biggest ones has become, and are we surprised, that people are really worried about is security, of course. But the other one is trustworthiness. And in a way, I'm glad to see that, because in fact, we are going to discuss this problem later on. So thanks very much. And let's go to the very last one now. As let's say, a solution to our concerns, we'd like to ask you about something that we're going to go back to later on also. Would you be more inclined to adopt open source if you knew that it did implement certain security or legal and ethical policies and standards? Or is that really irrelevant to what you're doing? For some of you, it may be. So far, it looks like everybody believes that indeed policy related and standards related issues are also very important with open source. And that is one reason why we have included them in the agenda today. So thank you very much. It's good to hear from you. And now let's go on to the agenda and start hearing now from our speakers. And the first part of our program will be hearing from our research and innovation researchers in projects that we are concerned with in SWForum.eu, talking about their experience with open source technologies. And first, we're going to hear from Ricardo Vitorino, who is the Smart Cities RNI manager at UbiWhere, and he will be representing and talking about FogProtect. Ricardo, over to you.
Thanks, John. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I hope you can hear me well and see the screen well. And as John presented, I'm here to showcase the FogProtect project, a cloud research and innovation action that was actually started in early 2020 and will come to an end this year. So we are just heading to the last months of effort for this project, but we look forward to keep the momentum going. I work at UbiWhere as head of research and innovation for smart cities, the project coordinator, but we have a lot of entities participating in this project, not only from the industry, but also from the research and academia. And we've been working together to protect sensitive data in the computing continuum. So thinking about what the project aims at, and because of the definition being a little bit ambiguous, we see sensitive data as the important information that has the potential for severe consequences if it becomes compromised. So it doesn't only mean personal data, which is the common interpretation of the phrase, but in fact it could refer to non-personal data, such as relating to commercial secrets or national security information. So data that's not related to a person, but which the compromise would need to be protected. So personal data, I guess you can understand it more easily. We relate to data that relates to an identifiable person, so the data subject, and it's might be used to humiliate or harm or extort in any way the individuals, while the other might harm entire companies and institutions to decrease their profits or disrupt markets. So this CIA triad, meaning the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, is to make sure that we can ensure that data is not disclosed to an unauthorized user, that data is not corrupted, unintended or maliciously, and that only authorized users can access, that in fact authorized users should access the data and not the other way around. And the main challenges behind the implementation of policies and technology to support this protection is that while data being produced in end devices such as smartphones, sensors, IoT devices, they are no longer only being processed at the cloud level, where we see more and more cloud services. And as Louise mentioned, a lot of different organizations, including the European Commission, to run different software solutions that process information that's being collected or generated at the source by ourselves, by our vehicles, by our equipment. But more and more, we are seeing this continuum of computing resources processing this information. This combines not only the cloud services in the end, but also what we see as fog nodes, hence the name of the project called FogProtect, but also the end devices, which distribute the compute power and introduces new challenges concerning the protection of the sensitive data described before. And the main challenges are about the limitations of certain nodes and end devices that constrain the data protection methods, meaning that our smartphone might not be as capable of processing long algorithms or huge storage as a big data center in the cloud. There is heterogeneity of fog nodes and end devices which hamper the consistent security, different operating systems, different libraries, different versions. The connectivity metadata of these devices and equipment can leak sensitive information. And some of these devices are actually mobile, meaning that we carry them in our pockets and we move around through different member states, different cities, different cell towers, which means that they need to comply with changing data protection policies. And this frequent change at the edge with faster vehicles, faster cars, faster equipment requires and might imply that highly dynamic changes of data protection risks. And again, since we are looking into this end-to-end sensitive data value chain, we need to ensure that there is transparency about the stakeholders, because the lack of such transparency can lead to unauthorized data access. So in a nutshell, and in a single picture, this is FogProtect, focusing on 4 building blocks that secures the data protection on the cloud computing continuum, but also involving the whole value chain. So we are thinking about we're developing the 4 main technology innovations: secure data container for data portability and mobility. Essentially, this we provided as well with data protection aware adaptive service and resource management, some policy management with advanced data protection capabilities, and also risk management models and tools for dynamic data protection. These solutions are generic, so they can be used in multiple contexts. These are being researched throughout the FogProtect consortium, but in order to demonstrate and to validate, we are applying it in 3 different contexts in real life scenarios: smart manufacturing, smart media, and smart cities, which I will briefly go through them. So smart manufacturing scenario describes the process where the shipping containers that carry goods from different places can actually be equipped with robots and computing resources to eliminate this non-value adding transportation time. So within this container, we can produce or refine a specific product, which the raw material is shipped overseas by the needed machine. So this is a use case being developed by Nokia, and you can see here within this container there are a lot of robots and machines handling the production, and you can see this dashboard with specific data on the production, which should not be accessed by unauthorized end users. So the cloud hosts all the data required for the product development, let's say. So FogProtect automates this risk analysis and the deployment and configuration at the edge within these containers, which are moving around the sea. And basically, the idea is to prevent that external access would not be authorized to see any information that's sensitive about the production and even the enterprise itself. The smart media one is developed by VRT in Belgium. They basically are providing user-generated videos recorded in a portable video booth for a video production. They are developing this chatterbox service, which interacts and provides questions to the people being interviewed in such portable video booths, and we have the AI tools collecting this data for later storage at the edge, but also at the cloud for analyzing and extracting metadata from them. So again, here FogProtect ensures that the access to personal data, which might be collected in the survey, in the questionnaire done in this portable video booth, is restricted and may differ between different roles of the authorized user. So it's possible to define and enforce necessary security and access policies in this centralized location in the cloud, but then apply it in the different settings where these booths are then demonstrated and deployed. Lastly, we have the smart cities use case, where we are running CCTV equipment, so cameras in closed circuit television that are monitoring selected places of a city. And in order to protect the privacy, we must ensure that the data collected that may identify data subject is protected from unauthorized end user. So our use case is to run convolutional neural networks to detect personal data and then anonymize the captured video and ensure that only specific users or policies can access the data. So again, FogProtect ensuring the correct security measures. So this is then applied to one of our products that we've developed at UbiWhere, allowing for shared smart infrastructure that enables new use cases and new scenarios and even new business models in an easy to mix and match infrastructure, targeting both governments and municipalities, but also business stakeholders. So FogProtect in this setting ensures that the identification of people and identification of vehicle license plates can then be anonymized according to different policies at the edge, not before sending the data through the cloud, so that we can ensure that if something is tampering the lampposts or the street furniture, we can protect and ensure that it's not easily accessible, and we can keep the processing running in a different equipment nearby. So the webinar is mostly focused on open source, and FogProtect is indeed leveraging and contributing to this ecosystem of open source software. One tool that stands out is the Fabric solution developed by IBM that implements different data protection policies and allows to enforce. It's fully available on GitHub, but other components from the project are made available throughout GitLab, and building up this open source community, working together with digital innovation hubs and other associations at the EU level to make sure that we can promote it and allow adoption. So even though the project ends this December, we are here for the long run. So our end-to-end dynamic protection of sensitive data is here to ensure this distributed, heterogeneous, and volatile edge to the cloud. And we want to ensure that the community can trust the project results, which was funded by the European Union, and make sure that it's adopted and maintained throughout time. So thank you once again for the opportunity of sharing this project and initiative. Feel free to reach out at FogProtect.eu or directly with me on LinkedIn, search for Ricardo Vitorino, or with my email. I'm happy to answer any questions in the meantime or later on, if you will. Thanks once again.
And thank you very much, Ricardo. Yes, as Ricardo said, you're welcome to ask questions anytime, including now. Otherwise, you will have the opportunity to also ask questions to Ricardo and the others during the panel session. So at any time that you have a question, by all means, put it in the Q&A session. So thank you very much, Ricardo, for now, until the questions start coming in. And then we can now hear from our next speaker from the R&I section of this webinar, and that is George Drosos, who is a researcher at Athens University of Economics and Business, and will be representing the FASTEN project. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that the Athens University of Economics and Business has been an enormous contributor to the open source scene in the European community. And so we're all very grateful for that. And now I pass the floor to George.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen firstly. So, can you watch my screen?
Yes.
So, thank you very much. So, firstly, I want to thank the organizers of this event for giving me the chance to present the project that I've been working. So, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Giorgos Drosos. I'm a researcher at the Business Analytics Laboratory at Athens University of Economics and Business. And I'm also a research software engineer in the FASTEN research projects. So I'm very pleased to present to you my work. And firstly, I would like to talk over some important notions in order to present the motivation behind FASTEN before jumping into the actual project. So to begin with, nowadays, as we all know, software engineers use open source libraries in order to create new software. We do this because we want to reduce development and maintenance costs. So open source software are usually hosted on centralized code repositories, and they are distributed through package managers. So package managers are automated programs that resolve the dependencies and download the third-party libraries. So here we want to make a distinction between direct and trusted dependencies. So let's suppose that we have a piece of software. Then we consider as a direct dependency any software component that is referenced directly by our program. So in the same manner, the dependencies of the direct dependencies that we are using are considered transitive from the perspective of our code. So we use transitive dependencies indirectly. This difference can also be seen in this illustrative diagram, and we can see that the dependency can be both direct and transitive for a corresponding program. So the dependency relations between packages form a direct dependency network. In such network, nodes are represented by the versions of the packages, and the edges represent the dependency from a library to another. Such networks are called package-based, and they are highly cohesive and often possess millions of libraries. So in this way, software packaging ecosystems are formed, which are very complex to analyze due to multiple and often conflicting version constraints. So the security in the supply chain in such networks is of utmost importance. To adduce some examples, in the NPM ecosystem, a removal of 11 lines of code resulted in the collapse of thousands of libraries. Also, the delay of the update of a vulnerable package, of a vulnerable version of Equifax, caused a serious security breach in hundreds of millions of users and caused damages worth $4 billion. Such issues are very critical because they are not always easy to discover, as in fact on the event stream incident, the malicious code went undiscovered for 2 months. So such issues have raised the awareness of the software community. It has led to the research community trying to mitigate the risks which are introduced by the dependency networks. So currently, the main challenges that a developer has to face when relying on third-party open source code can be broken into 3 categories. So firstly, it's very important to find a means of estimating the risk which is introduced by the dependencies. It's also very important to know the compliance with the third-party code, especially in terms of licenses. And last but not least, it's very crucial to know the impact of a change in our code into other dependent projects, because many times the code that we are using has many projects are relying on the code that we are developing. So currently, such issues were addressed through the analysis of package-based dependency networks. Such networks, unfortunately, possess a major disadvantage. The analysis is limited only to the package level, which is quite imprecise. To adduce an example, when we depend on a vulnerable package, through the package-based dependency network, we know that we depend on the package, but we do not know for sure if we use the vulnerable code or not, because the actual code reuse lies in the method level. So to overcome such limitations, we propose a more fine-grained analysis on the dependency network, this time in the method level. In such network, nodes are represented by functions, and entities are represented by function calls. So those networks offer more fine-grained information and depict the actual call relationships between the open source libraries. So with that bear in mind, the FASTEN project, which stands for Fine-Grained Analysis of Software Ecosystems as Networks, aims to make package management more robust and precise. To do so, the main idea is to construct call graphs for the open source libraries in order to create call-based dependency networks. So what exactly is a call graph? A call graph is a control flow graph which represents the calling relationships between functions in a computer program. So in the project, we perform ecosystem-wide analysis on the call graphs, and we store our results in a centralized service. So with respect to the main objectives of FASTEN, first and foremost, we want to perform an ecosystem-wide, give me 1 second. Yes, sorry, we want to perform an ecosystem-wide analysis for 3 particular languages, namely C, Java, and Python. And this requires building precise call graphs for each language. We also want to perform ecosystem-wide change impact analysis. Such analysis help us assess, for example, the number of packages which will break if we change a function in our own code. We also want to introduce a fine-grained compliance monitoring, which will help the developers know for sure if their code complies with their dependencies, especially in terms of licenses. Moreover, we want to introduce a fine-grained dependency risk profiling, which will help know if we import a specific vulnerability from the open source library from our dependencies. And finally, we want to integrate such analysis into the package managers of Maven and PyPy. So here we can see an overview of the FASTEN architecture. So starting from the left side, we have some streams of external data. These streams can be vulnerability information coming from SV or NVT. It can be metadata information coming from open source project hosters like GitHub and GitLab. And this metadata information usually includes licenses. And also the most important thing, we consume source binary code information in order to create the call graphs. So this information is consumed in the FASTEN server, which you can see in the center. The FASTEN server consists of 3 layers. The first phase, the call graph generator. In this phase, we perform a fine-grained analysis. We produce precise call graphs using static and dynamic analysis tools. Then, on the analysis layer, we use the call graphs in order to perform various analyses with respect to security, compliance, impact, quality, and risk. In order to achieve such analysis, we combine the profiling information from the call graphs with the information that we received from the data streams. Finally, on the storage layer, we store the results of our analysis in a relational database and in a graph database. Those two databases comprise the FASTEN knowledge base. So that this knowledge base is available to the developers through a REST API and through a web UI, where everyone can find our solutions. We have also integrated our services into the package managers of Maven and PyPy, and anyone can use our tools either as a standalone application or as part of a continuous integration pipeline. Here we have a simple example use case of our integration with Maven. As we can see on the left screenshot, we have a POM configuration file, and we have declared our tool as a dependency, the FASTEN Maven plugin. And during the build process, we can see that we receive 3 errors. First, we receive a license incompatibility. Secondly, we receive an issue with a security vulnerability, which is actually reachable from our code. And also we identified the dependency conflict. So here we present a snapshot of our demo website, where, for example, we can see for a specific method, the call chain that led to the exposure of a vulnerability. And you can find our website in the URL posted here. So this is our FASTEN Consortium. It consists of multiple companies and universities all over Europe. We all work together in order to enhance robustness in software communities. The project was established in 2018 and was successfully completed recently. So finally, I want to thank you everyone for listening to this talk. I would welcome any questions or comments. And you can visit our website at FASTEN/project.eu in order to get a better view of our project. Also, you can follow us on our Twitter account in order to get the latest news for our project. And finally, if you are interested in the development side of FASTEN or you want to contribute to the project, feel free to visit our GitHub organization. So thank you very much, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
And thank you very much, George. And yes, anytime you are welcome to write questions into the Q&A chat, either right now or later on, and also during the panel. We're always welcome to hear from you. So once again, thank you very much, George, for your great presentation. You spoke to many issues that go to the very heart of the open source problem, and it would be good to come back to those also in the panel. So now let's proceed to the second section of our session today. We would like to take the opportunity to introduce you to a couple of projects that are very relevant to certain aspects of open source, and these are policy and standardization initiatives. So we would like to present short presentations of each of the two projects in the EC software community that are dealing with these. And the first is the PolicyCloud project, which will be presented by Konstantinos Oikonomou, who is a full stack and research software engineer at UbiTech. And as I said, will be representing and telling us about PolicyCloud now. So the floor is yours, Konstantinos. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, John. Let me share my screen as well. Okay, I think you can see my picture.
Yes.
So, hello from me as well. My name is Konstantinos Oikonomou. I'm a research and software development for UbiTech. And today my presentation will focus on the cloud for data-driven policy management, and especially towards interoperable data-driven policy making under the scope of the Horizon 2020 Policy Cloud project. During the previous years, a lot of effort has been put into attempts to standardize the policy making and data interoperability landscape. And here you can see some of the most prominent ones, which are the inspired data specifications, which refers to interoperability of spatial datasets and services, the Health Level 7, which is an electronic message format for health information exchange, the Common European Research Information Format, which is a representation of research information and research policies, the ISO 23751, which is a standard for cloud computing and distributed platforms, the Common Reporting Standards, which refers to interoperable and automatic exchange of information from financial institutions, and finally the Friend of a Friend and social interconnected online communities, which are two standard-based ontologies for describing social relationships and analyzing social media information. We can see that there are standards there, but unfortunately, despite the presence of those standards, during the development and evaluation of PolicyCloud, we came to the conclusion that some major needs of the project were not met by combination, let's say, of these standards. The gaps that were identified were a lack of semantic interoperability in the given domain, a lack of semantic interoperability across datasets from different sectors, and a lack of process interoperability. In order to tackle those, we introduced a three-dimensional end-to-end analysis using a novel interim repository workplace. You can see here the entire workflow in the picture, but we will go step by step in the next slides to describe and understand its different stages. The first stage, which you can see by the red rectangle on the right, is the preliminary assessment of the available data. Those data reside within their original data repositories, and an initial analysis from a legal and ethical perspective happens at this first stage. No data movement or processing happens yet. And in the ecosystem of the PolicyCloud project, we ensure that only authorized legal and ethical personnel can access and assess the data. After this first initial phase, we go to the second stage, which occurs just before the full ingestion of the data. During this phase, the interim repository is set up and the final legal and ethical assessment happens. The data and information silos are removed, and this is the stage of the data interoperability introduction. Still, during this second stage, only safe and authorized access is allowed to the data. Finally, during the third stage, which occurs only when the dataset's legal and ethical confirmation happens on the previous stage, the second stage, this third stage is when the dataset ingestion happens into the layered PolicyCloud architecture. And then this is followed by the data anonymization and aggregation. So we are sure that the measures identified in the second stage are already applied to the datasets that are safe before the ingestion. In this three-dimensional approach that was just presented, we used a number of following criteria in order to guide the ethical and legal assessment. Those criteria are the data and intellectual property protection laws, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, the ISO 27013, which concerns integrated implementation of an information security management system, the CSA Cloud Controls Matrix and Code of Conduct for GDPR compliance, and the EU Cloud Code of Conduct with specific requirements for cloud service providers. At the end, as PolicyCloud is in its final stages and have already integrated and utilized the proposed three-dimensional approach, we can safely deduce that it was an efficient approach in the context of the project. Of course, further effort needs to be made to standardize data interoperability in data-driven policy making, and the balance needs to be struck between, on the one hand, maximizing legal and ethical compliance, which creates over-restrictive registration processes, and on the other hand, maximizing the registrability of data analytics tools, which can lead to failure to meet legal and ethical standards. Now, specifically for PolicyCloud, the solution we implemented to strike this balance, or to at least try and strike this balance, is to require users to document the legal and ethical measures that are going to be performed during their registration to the platform. This has led to a satisfactory degree of assurance regarding the legal and ethical soundness of analytics. If you're interested for more, there is currently a white paper in development that is to be published on November 2022 via Standardization, and you can also visit the PolicyCloud project webpage, the PolicyCloud LinkedIn, or even my personal LinkedIn, and I will be happy to answer more questions there and discuss about the PolicyCloud project in general. Thank you very, very much for your time. Back to you, John.
Thanks very much for making this introduction for us to this very valuable resource that I think needs to be even better known. And we'll discuss later on its applicability also to open source. So I would like to now pass the floor to Nicholas to make also a quick presentation of the HSbooster project, where Nick is the coordinator. So Nick, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for the invitation this afternoon. It's good to hear the different projects as well and the activities that they're working on, which sound very interesting and relevant to some of the areas which I'll talk about in my quick presentation. My name's Nick Ferguson. I work for the Senior Project Manager at COMMpla, and I also coordinate a new coordination and support action called HSbooster, which is an important part of the European Commission's standardization strategy, in that it's a pilot for an eventual standardization booster that will be put in place. Now, the objective of it is to address how EU projects, so Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects, approach standardization and to improve that situation. We've seen reports from the European Commission, in particular, a study on a scoping study for the Code of Practice, which demonstrated the different challenges which projects have in gaining greater valorization for the results through standardization. So the project aims to address this issue and to increase impact and market access to projects in this area. Our objectives are to build a community, a European community around standardization, both from an expert point of view, standardization expert point of view, and also through identifying and supporting projects working or that need to address standardization as part of their contract with the European Commission. The end impact will be greater uptake of new technologies resulting from better work in standardization. So you can see the consortium of partners we have. We have expertise in from academic points of view on standardization, and also commercial points of view, and also from a national standardization body, and also experience in delivering booster services for the European Commission. We're supported by a strong and varied expert external advisory group, which covers different vertical sectors. So it's important to point out that the booster addresses all areas of standardization, not just ICT. So you can see various vertical sectors represented here, such as health, for example, and also standardization organizations, so European standardized organizations such as COMMpla and ETSI, and also international, such as ISO. So these are key people to get us acquainted with the various urgencies and needs that these organizations have. So how do we do this? Well, we deliver a series of services which are available to all Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects, both ongoing and complete. All these projects can apply, and the services are delivered to them free of charge. There's no charge to the project. We engage with a community of standardization experts who will deliver some of these services directly and address the need that often projects have in gaining experience and expertise in the area. So giving them real hands-on support so that they can address how they approach standardization. You can see that we have 3 different services on the right of the screen. So we take projects and support them in various levels of understanding standardization, the importance of it, to mapping their project results to relevant standards, and then actual consultancy with experts in terms of helping them to contribute to the revision of existing standards or the creation of new standards, and also the adoption of existing standards. So how does this operate? Well, it's pretty simple, really. There's a continuously open call, and projects can apply very easily online on a first come, first served basis. We have budget to deliver 500 consultancy services to different projects. And as you can see, the way that the services work is we follow them through a series of actions. So understanding benefits of standards, to mapping, and then to actually contributing. The project is mapped to an expert, either from our consortium or from the external pool of experts, and then the services are delivered very quickly. Experts who we are recruiting are actually paid for this, for supporting the projects, because of course there's no such thing as a free lunch. So we have budget to support the experts in actually addressing the needs of these projects, and this can help to feed into the needs that the various European standardization organizations, their technical committees, need to address. Now, in terms of topics, there's a set of high-level themes which the project addresses. So there's a series of topics which the project addresses. There are 5 high-level areas, as you can see, which aren't all on ICT topics, and these address different things from health, resilience, green transition, sustainable digitalization, and smart city and circular economy. So these are various topics which, where there is a standardization urgency, which has been recognized by the European Commission, perhaps through the standardization requests being made, for example, for the topic of artificial intelligence, or that is an area of importance for the standardization organizations that we are engaging with. If you go to the next, you can get more information at the link there. If you go to the next, the types of support vary, as I said before. This can go from level 1, understanding of the benefits of standardization. And we've seen in the first applications that we've received from projects, we've received just under 40 applications, that there is a big need for mapping. So identifying areas for new standardization, mapping results to relevant technical working groups or technical committees, and really already at an early stage trying to support a project in carrying out a landscape activity. So often projects have a deliverable on this. So your projects are able to use the support services to boost that activity. You can also see training as well at different levels, and that's an important part of the project too, and providing expertise and boosting that in consortia. As I mentioned earlier, we have an open call available for standardization experts. So we're calling out to anybody who's working in standardization. If they want to help contribute to the European Commission standardization strategy and improve the way that projects are able to collaborate with and contribute to standardization activities, then please sign up. It's very quick, and we will match you up to an appropriate project which reflects your profile. So yeah, the final message is become part of our community. If you're a project, you need support or guidance on how to address standardization in your project, then please apply. The booster services are available and are free of charge. And for the experts as well, if you're interested in becoming part of a broader community and helping projects and guiding them and making sure that their contributions are timely and of value, then please join us here. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions.
And thank you very much, Nick, for presenting this really valuable resource that has been made available to the community, and can help in many different ways, including the problem of open source. And in fact, that brings us very naturally to the next part, the last part of our session here, and that is a panel discussion. So I would ask all of our speakers to turn on their videos and become the panel. We can start a discussion now. And of course, as always, we welcome questions also from the participants. So I would like to kick the panel off, in fact, and I would like to set the tone for the central issue that I would like to discuss in this panel, which is one that was brought up by our participants when they were asked to express what they felt was the biggest challenge around open source. It was trustworthiness. How can we trust it? And I would like to come back to that and have each of you, from your very different points of view, and there are many on open source, help us to sort out this issue of trustworthiness and what we can do about it. So I have to put somebody on the spot first, so I'm going to put Ricardo on the spot first. So there are many points of view on open source software. Drosos, you will be next, I think, because our two speakers from the RNI project address two of the most important issues. One is the applications to which open source could be provided, and another is just the entire infrastructure of open source, let's say the way the community is put together, or the technical infrastructure. So let's start with Ricardo. So you have talked about a critical application. It's about sensitive data, and there are others of code that are critical, like autonomous driving or something like that, which could also be safety critical. So if somebody will tell you, I do not feel like I can trust to use open source software for doing such a critical application, how can you reassure them that this does make sense and that it is an advantageous thing to do?
That's a very good question, John. And indeed, it depends who's asking, right? Because I think that the main added value is that as you put up open source projects available, you allow any type of end user to analyze the code base and see what is actually doing it. But is the person asking, do they have the technical skills, the digital skills to do that kind of assessment? Can they analyze the different scripting languages and code and the policies and whatever? So I think that we can do it in a communication way, meaning that you might not need to know exactly the details of those different repositories and projects, but actually look into the infographics of it and see that, okay, it's maintained. It has these people behind it. This team of members, I can see that they are from different organizations. So it's not something that's being brought up by a single organization and relying on them. It's being brought up by this community. And I can see that they are active or they are versed in different type of skills or so on. So if we can make this more friendlier to any type of stakeholder, that they can see that the project is under active development, that they have good policies in place, that they have a good track record, and the community building them is not being ignored and it's actually being involved and engaged, and we see a lot of stakeholders participating in that, I think that should create trustworthiness, I would assume, because if I just want to understand how something works, if it's if it's a black box doing something, or if it's an open source project doing that, I just need to make sure that, okay, things are done properly. So I can either trust the black box manufacturer, or I can actually look into the team and look into the how it's being developed. So that would be the main added value. So if you have technical skills and digital skills to look into the code itself, then there's no problem. It's just a matter of the repositories being accessible somewhere. Other than that, I think there's some work to do in terms of showcasing that these graphs, charts, and these repositories and these open source libraries provide mean that there's an active team behind it that's keeping this up to date, that's keeping up the best practices, that it's certifying this according to certain policies and so on. So in short, those will be my suggestions, because I believe that will be the added value for any type of end user.
Thanks very much, Ricardo. That makes a lot of sense. And in a funny way, it makes you a kind of a user of what George is doing, because in the sense you are saying, if we can demonstrate that everything is well maintained and well kept together, then we will create trustworthiness. So George, where do you see the problems with this based on your experience in FASTEN?
So unfortunately, many people do not trust open source software. And one of the main problems, we discussed this earlier, is that many projects are inactive. And this affects negatively all the projects that depend on them, because many times there is a lack of support, and the time to fix, and it takes a long to fix bugs. And therefore many developers turn to proprietary software or try to implement their code on their own in order to have the full control of the project. And also a very important pain point is related to the security risks introduced by open source software, because we receive a functionality, but in contrast, we increase the risk of including third-party code. And especially in the last couple of months, there has been an exponential rise in attacks in the supply chain of software ecosystems. And in such ecosystems, users try to become contributors in the open source projects, gain the trust of the developers, and they try to insert malicious code. And then this code is injected into the dependent projects that use this package. And those attacks are very common in open source, and they're very prominent in the last months especially. And we should firstly understand such problems and the risks that they are introducing, and try to find solutions.
All right, thank you very much. I think you've addressed very well the pain points, the technical pain points of ensuring trustworthiness. So let's move up a step, one level, not of abstraction, but one level. And let's go to what was the third poll question? And that was whether we will consider things more trustworthy if they had more support at the policy level and at the standards level. So Konstantinos, I'd like to go to you now and ask about that, how policy support can help to improve perception of trustworthiness. And that is also related to a question we had also from the participants, or a comment, let's say, whereas companies are not being compliant with licensing. I mean, they're basically abusing the open source movement. And that also makes people less confident and less interested in using open source if they see abuses going on. So how can policy initiatives help out here?
Yes, that remark that was brought up was very, very important, because this is something we see commonplace every day in software development. And we also saw from the poll that people are generally very well dispositioned towards a good ethical or security policy in order to trust an open source software. And even if we look at, let's say, from a security engineering perspective, a trusted system is a system that enforces security policy. So the concept is the same, the base is the same. So when we are talking about OSS, fulfilling only a security policy, of course, is not enough. But if a set of policies that cover many fields like security, legal, ethical compliance, if such a set is enforced and fulfilled, then it can incentivize the adoption of that OSS. Now, specifically in PolicyCloud, this is something that we observed and led us to the need to develop something that could tackle this. And that's why we developed this three-dimensional approach. And specifically for a platform that handles data, this platform has a much higher chance of being adopted and trusted if it can prove that it fulfills certain policies. So we had certain examples of adopters through our pilot applications that expressed reluctancy at the beginning when we were just presenting the platform in the initial workshops. But after they saw that we are going to implement certain standards and we're going to have this pipeline we presented, then they were incentivized to use and adopt our platform. So this was a great example of fulfilling policies, convincing stakeholders to adopt an OSS solution.
All right, thanks very much. Now, so Nick, you heard one of the key words that Konstantinos said: reluctance. The open source community, you know, they have mostly been, they're used to de facto standardization, because that's sort of the way it works. Something wins out and then it becomes a de facto standard. So they're reluctant. They're even suspicious of the standards world. So do you feel they can be brought on board and they can have something from standardization based on what you're now seeing in HSbooster?
Yeah, thanks. I think Konstantinos has just answered my question there, because you know, the reluctance thing was kind of resolved when they demonstrated that they'd adopted standards, they'd used standardization. So it's all about trust, and standards can provide that. Another key word which was mentioned today is cybersecurity, and cybersecurity and standards are kind of quite similar in that they're often an afterthought or something that is addressed by developers quite late, when actually if you look at it from the beginning and plan things right from the start, then your potential to make an impact on the market or avoid the reluctance that we've just heard about is increased a lot. That one of our partners in our project, SGS, was telling us about a client who developed a nice open source solution and then had to wait another year before actually getting onto the market, because nobody was interested, nobody trusted it, because they needed to adopt the right standards and start to improve the way that the potential product was presented. So trust is key, and standards can support innovation and the adoption of new technologies as well. So it's important in the emerging technologies field, which of course many of the projects that we work with are looking at. So they're also very important to introduce innovative products. They provide, particularly for open source solutions, interoperability. So interoperability for new sectors, for example. So yeah, it's very important for competitiveness on a European level and potentially on a global level too. So they're an essential business tool and can really make an impact.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, Luis, I saw you smiling a lot as you were hearing them speak. I'm sure that you've seen it all that our speakers have been talking about now. But I think it's also valid to put the question to the Commission. The Commission also sees a problem of trustworthiness in the European software community. So how would you say the Commission is trying to support the promotion of a perception of trustworthiness so that your vision can go through?
Yeah, actually, that's a very interesting question. And also it's a very interesting question because I would say that it has two very different target people for it. I remember 20 years ago when it's not the beginnings of open source, but at least my beginnings with open source in 2000, where a big problem was on FUD, on fear, uncertainty, and doubt that was put for the use of open source. And how you cannot trust actually something that, well, you do not have a neck to pick. So if something goes wrong, I know that I can go to this company and do something, but if something goes wrong with this, then who to pick? To a certain extent, this trustworthiness has been actually filled up by the business models in open source. So the fact that open source has been successful and that we all in our telephones, in our computers have got some sort of open source, it's because, not because we trust open source, but because those companies who are actually supplying us products are actually using open source to develop their solution, their value-added proposition to us. So to a certain extent, this is working at least for the end user. If the question is how to bring it to trustworthiness so that end users will directly use open source coming from a project, that is far more difficult. I don't imagine my mother-in-law going to a project and downloading software, coding it, and or compiling it and using it. But I imagine my mother-in-law going to the Carrefour and purchasing a new mobile phone which has millions of tons of open source inside. So to a certain extent, when we speak about end user, about the consumer of the final product, to a certain extent, the market economy has worked to solve this issue. The other thing is about the trustworthiness of the actual companies who are integrating open source. So, and that for sure is something that it's really an issue to make sure that these companies remove their fear, uncertainty, and doubt to use some assets that are already there. And why is it important? Because if they don't, they will not use it. And their competitors, maybe outside Europe, will actually adopt another strategy, will integrate open source in their development, and well, it may be possible that EU companies become less competitive because of the fear they have to integrating some sort of open source which is already there. And that is something for that the study on the economic impact pointed out. To a certain extent, we have to act as a lighthouse showing that, okay, yeah, as everything in life, there is a risk. But to a certain extent, if you're running your company, you should try all different alternatives. You should understand what are the risks. You should also understand how to correct these risks if there are, and what are the possibilities of exploiting some assets, because otherwise you'll come into the position of having to finance things that your competitors don't, and you'll come into a price structure that will make you less competitive, and you're going to go out of the market. And that's certainly something that we don't want for EU enterprises. We want that they stay competitive and they know where to do. And of course, this is from a free perspective, free market perspective. Look, we know that there is this, and it's up to you to choose. And it's not that all the industry have to to take one solution or not, but what is good for the European economy is that at least we do not have all eggs in the same basket.
Well, thank you very much. For me, at least, it was very enlightening, and I completely agree. So we have reached the looks like we reached the end of our session. Thanks to everybody, all of the speakers and panelists, of course, during our session, and all of our participants for being here with us today. It went on for an hour and a half, but I felt it could have gone on for 3 hours. And for that reason, I would like to invite you all to keep coming to the webinar series of Software Forum, which will be announced over the next times, and also remind you once again of the workshops day that is being organized on the 2nd of December, sponsored by the Commission and SWForum.eu, that you are all welcome and very much invited to be a part of. So the presentation and the recording will be available on the website. So come back and pick that up for any things that you missed or wanted to take a look again. And by all means, send your questions to the participants. If and when you have them, they're more than happy to be in contact with you and answer your questions and begin to interact with you in order to keep the open source community within the EU growing healthily. So once again, from me, thank you very much to all. It has been a pleasure to host you today and to speak with you today. Thank you for all of you for collaborating with the Software Forum team on this initiative. Thank you.